Hello again. This is the Juice of Use number 4, and this one's about something that's been bothering me for quite a while, and that is that thing that they call a warrant, or a warrant, as it actually is. Um, Now there are 4 main types of warrant, all of which are not applicable to what we're doing. So you've got the mandatory arrest warrant, the general warrant, custodial warrant, and the jurisdictional warrant. And in the alleged debt scenario, none of those warrants are applicable, mostly because they're issued with reference to criminal actions, and our situation is not criminal. So if we do see enforcement agents at our door, and remember, this is not common, then they usually claim to have some sort of warrant that they're acting under. A warrant of control, as they like to call them. So, what is a warrant of control? Well, here's the legal definition. A warrant of control is a legal document issued by a court that authorizes enforcement agents, like bailiffs, to take control of a debtor's assets or goods to settle outstanding debts. Typically used in cases where a judgment debt has not been paid, it allows enforcement agents to enter a debtor's property and seize goods, which may then be sold to recover the amount owed. Warrants of control are often used in the context of unpaid civil debts, such as unpaid rent, court fines, or other financial obligations. The process of obtaining a warrant of control generally follows a court judgment or order confirming the debtor's obligation to pay. It's an escalation in debt recovery, as the debtor will have had prior notice and opportunity to pay or respond before reaching this stage. So that seems reasonably comprehensive. And doing my due diligence, I went further and looked at some legal websites, and I found some interesting statements. I'll just list them. Everything I'm going to say is in quotes. It's important to understand that a warrant of control is not issued arbitrarily, but is the result of a legal process that has determined a debt is owed. Only then will a county court bailiff be empowered to collect it. The debt is likely to be a debt owed to the government, council tax, parking fines, child maintenance arrears, etc. As bailiffs are unable to collect debts protected under the Consumer Credit Act, credit cards, payday loans, overdrafts, etc. It's illegal for the court to grant a warrant of control without prior county court judgment proceedings. Once a warrant of control is issued, you will receive an enforcement notice. This notice gives you 7 clear days' notice to pay your debt. So, let's pick apart the wording in everything that's been stated, because as with all things, that allows us to see the remedy that's inherent within the concept. Starting with the definition of warrants of control, the very first sentence tells us that it must be issued by a court, and as we already know, that must obviously be subsequent to a hearing and follow due process to the letter. The next point states that this warrant authorizes enforcement agents like bailiffs to take control of the debtor's assets. And that generates an immediate question. Who is like a bailiff? We know what a bailiff is and what their credentials are. They're appointed by the court on the authority of the king that flows down through the justice system, and they have an oath of office, etc. But which enforcement agent is like that? What agent of Jacob's debt collections, for instance, has that kind of delegation? How are non-legally trained debt collectors by day, nightclub doorman by night, in any way like a royally appointed bailiff? So that claim needs a bit more clarification, I'd say. It then states that these warrants are typically issued in cases where a judgment debt has not been paid. So that would be after a court has ruled against us and issued judgment, and we've still failed to pay for some reason. It seems that many of these enforcement goons are completely unaware of the readily available facts, and in that ignorance move straight into pretending that they're bailiffs and have a legitimate warrant to come into our homes and basically rob us. So how do we know that their so-called warrant is fraudulent and has been issued correctly by a court? Well, it's simple. Under due process, we would already have full knowledge of the case, the hearing, their ruling, and the actual judgment long before these idiots play their games, because they're required to inform us. If there was a legit warrant of control issued by the court to come and take our possessions, we would definitely know about its existence long before they arrived at our door. We would already have been sent a court summons, and if we didn't attend and they automatically ruled against us for a no-show, then we'd have been notified in writing that A, we'd lost the case, and B, that a judgment had been made against us, and ultimately that a warrant of control had been issued and was on its way to us. It's a long and arduous process, and not particularly easy, even for the court, to generate warrants, which is why this current state of affairs exists. It's very easy to get what you want if the general public is unaware of what can and can't be done, which is why the onus is on us to educate ourselves on the intricacies of the debt game. If we don't, as has been the case up until recently, then we're fair game for being screwed out of our sweat equity and don't even have the slightest idea of what they're doing. Once we know the actual rules of the game, we're immediately armoured to defend ourselves rigorously against those that clearly don't. And that means that if one of those enforcement agent goons arrives at our door, waving his fancy lanyard in our faces and claiming he's here with a warrant for removing our possessions, we have some very pointed questions to ask. And those questions are extremely difficult to answer without him lying and digging himself into a deeper hole. As always, I'd film the encounter on my phone. I wouldn't be annoyed or fearful because I'd already know that this was a shakedown based in extortion. And the beauty of the situation is that the goon who's posturing and flexing his believed authority in my face has absolutely no concept of the seriousness of the act he's committing. Our questions would be along the lines of, can you please identify yourself? Get his ID on camera and say out loud his name. Who do you work for? Are you a bailiff or a debt collector? And this is a leading question to get him to state on the record that he's a bailiff, because 9 times out of 10 these guys do claim to be bailiffs. If he claims to be a bailiff, I'd immediately ask him to produce his oath of office, because that's a requirement of bailiffs. If he does produce an oath of office and is in fact a bona fide bailiff and is there to enforce a private debt matter, then he's in big trouble, because bailiffs can only enforce government-related debts. That's a big, big point. Credit cards, bank loans, unsecured finance cannot be enforced by bailiffs. So in reality, there's very little chance of him being an actual bailiff. So it's usually safe to assume that he isn't. These lanyard flashing goons are happy to use the word bailiff in their speech because they want to appear to be the real deal and intimidate us. which right there should tell you that they aren't the genuine item. If he works for a recovery agent, I'd ask to see a copy of their authorization from the court to attempt collections. Please show me what you have that you believe is a bona fide warrant of control. Remember, a copy of the court ruling should already be in your possession, including a copy of the warrant that was issued. So we know already that the document he believes is a warrant is no such thing. If he attempts to present something on a phone or a tablet, get a picture of it. Ask why you were not forwarded a copy of it prior to his calling. Ask why you know nothing about any of this situation. Ask if he understands what a real warrant looks like. Ask if he knows the due process involved in obtaining a real warrant. Ask if he understands the seriousness of impersonating a bailiff. Ask if he fully understands exactly what he's involved in. And finally, ask if he's ever been advised by his employer about the consequences to him of doing what he's doing. I'd tell him politely but firmly that I strongly suspect he's committing a crime of impersonating a bailiff, as he's failed to produce any legitimate credentials that confirm he works for the courts and is attempting to extort monies via confiscation of my private property by deceptive means. Don't forget, I'll say it again. As stated in the legal briefs, a bailiff cannot be engaged for collection of a non-government debt that's protected by the consumer credit laws. These companies still haven't realised this and randomly appear at a victim's house calling themselves a bailiff. Right there, we've just been handed our big stick. I tell him that if he doesn't go away immediately, then I'll call the police and get the matter onto the police record for later use, when I'll be filing proceedings against him for his actions, as there's now enough evidence from the footage to make a strong case for fraud, extortion, harassment, malicious communications, and several other charges that he'll be unlikely to be successful in defending, because we have all of his details and footage of the encounter. At that point, I'd close the door and ignore anything else he might say. This practice is conducted far too often, and sometimes the police will arrive, usually to assist the enforcement officer in committing his crime. Their remit, after all, is to enforce the law, not understand it. And so, all too often, they unwittingly help these goons. The police are in a position of total ignorance of this aspect of legislation at this time, but it will change very soon, just as soon as the first officers are named in a suit with the debt collector. In any case, once we closed the door, if we'd even opened it, that should be the end of the encounter. The police cannot assist the goons in damaging our property, or forcing entry, or observing a locksmith while he drills out the locks, if there's no legitimate warrant in place. And if that scenario ever occurs, you can start browsing the listings for your new private yacht, because they will be paying you a lot of money for their mistake. I'll say it again for the sake of repetitive reinforcement. The entire scenario is illegal, as no warrant can be issued by any court without having followed due process, and we would already know all about it. So if it does happen, then film it and gather as much evidence as you can. I know it sounds easy, but take solace in the fact that the situation is massively sweetened by knowing that you're standing in truth and have the law on your side, despite what the enforcement agent or police might try to incorrectly state on the day. These situations are rare, thankfully, but do still happen, so it's always best to know where you stand when repelling them. If it's all too much and you're overwhelmed by it, just close the door and tell them to write to you. Buy yourself some time to address the situation on your terms. So I hope that sheds a bit more light on the warrant game. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more Juice of Use. Cheers.